Today we're exploring the crime fiction of Peter McGarvey. Welcome to Tea at Taxevity, where you get insights from insiders who make life better, our many clients and friends. My name is Pramod Sharma, the actuary at the Taxevity Insurance Advisory, and our guest today is Peter McGarvey. Welcome, Peter.
Welcome. Thank you.
Peter, what do you do when you're not being interviewed?
I write crime fiction. That's my career these days. So I go out and kill all the people I can't really kill in real life, but I do it on the page instead.
Okay, well, it does seem safer to do these things on paper rather than in real life.
Yeah, believe it or not, Canada does have a fairly strict set of guidelines about who you can kill and who you can't. And
okay, now, when did you start? So we know why you started writing crime fiction. Yeah. When did you get started?
I started about 3.5 years ago. I retired from my last job and went out the door with the idea that I am going to really take a serious career move towards being a writer. It's something I always wanted to do. It's something I tried to do in the past, but it's hard to be a writer and hold down a career, and I felt like I could now focus on doing the one thing and trying to do it well. And that's exactly what I did.
Okay, and that's terrific. I don't read a lot of fiction myself, but I have read your books, and they're very captivating. And I'm really glad that we have a chance to talk to you about them.
Thank you.
Now, the first book that you wrote is called Dark Sunset.
That's right.
Where did you get the idea for that?
That came to me a long time ago. It's actually been inside me for about 25 or 30 years. It comes from a story of a writer who I always admired, who lived out in California, and a ruthless land developer basically drove him out of his cabin, burned it down, and stole his land from him. And it was one of those crimes that was never punished. And he basically died of a broken heart. And I thought those had great elements. That story had a lot of great elements in it that could be turned into, well, what I thought originally was going to be kind of a dramatic novel, but I saw that it could work really well as the base story for a crime novel, and that's what I eventually did. And that becomes a core element, a central element in Dark Sunset. Changed him to a poet just to kind of make it a little bit different, and I changed the location from California to Michigan.
Okay, and that was something else I wanted to ask you about, because all of your books so far relate to Michigan, and we're in Toronto, we're in Ontario. Yep. Why Michigan?
Michigan, I grew up in southwestern Ontario, very close to Michigan. It was always an influence on me growing up. I visited there a lot, and coincidentally, when I was working, especially in the last 10 or 12 years, I spent a lot of time in Detroit, in Michigan, doing my job with General Motors and working on projects for them. So it kind of came to me naturally. Also, the structure of the story. It's the character in it's running for election, for sheriff. You don't do that in Canada. That doesn't happen in Canada. So there's a very kind of specific bunch of reasons why I wanted it set in Michigan. And I was comfortable setting it in Michigan. I knew the state really well. So.
Yes, and definitely you do, because I remember a few years ago we went to Maker Faire in Detroit.
That's
and
right.
You recommended a particular pizza place,
Yep.
Buddy's Pizza. And whenever we pass through Michigan and it's getting close to dinner time, and we're near Detroit, then we
Buddy's in Dearborn. That's always a great spot for dinner. So yeah. But I wasn't sure how people in Michigan would react to the books, and the Lansing reviewer up in Lansing did a review last January of the first two books, and I was really anxious, but also not anxious to see what he'd written. But he loved the books and loved the stories that I told. Had no complaints. I guess I got the Michigan stuff right in the stories, so the Michigan people seem to like them.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Now, your book also touches on a dark theme,
Yeah, it does.
Spousal abuse.
Yep, spousal abuse was really I like to try and tackle a serious theme in each of the books. I mean, it's great to read crime fiction, but I think it should have maybe a better purpose. And I felt that spousal abuse was really a story I wanted to, or an element that I really wanted to work into the story, and it became a central element actually in the story. And recently we've seen examples of spousal abuse in the media, and it led to the question that a lot of people on TV were asking about, why would she stay? And that's something that I try and tackle in Dark Sunset. And, it happens to a very strong character, somebody that you wouldn't think it would ever happen to.
Yeah, because I was certainly shocked because I was reading the book and they say, what?
Well, we don't want to give away too much of the book, but yeah, it's basically a part of the book that really stopped a lot of readers. It changed them. They really said, "Wow!" When I hit that chapter, the book really, the experience changed for me. Became much more engrossing and much more, just they got really, really involved with what they were reading in the book, and they have been up to then as well. But it was just another layer for them. So.
Yeah, what I really liked is how everything flowed together. So it wasn't as if you've got different elements that you're just combining. It all made sense.
Yeah, there's a logic and a construction to the book. I do work from in that one particularly, a really, really detailed outline. I needed to. I tried to write books before, and they usually ended up in the drawer. And a lot of it had to do with discipline, but some of it had to do with just not knowing where the story was, or I'll start writing and the story will come to me. That sort of feeling. And unfortunately, it doesn't happen. You really have to know where you're going when you're writing a story.
Right, and I wanted to know more about your writing process, and now is a good time to ask you about that. How many books have you written?
I've written 6 novels so far.
And how many have been published?
3 have been published, and there's 3 that are in various stages of publication. So.
Okay, so by having done so many books, you clearly know about the writing process. Can you tell those of us who are not writers what your process is?
Well, I think for every writer it's different. For me, I can certainly speak from my experience. I write 2,000 words every day when I'm writing a book. I start with the outline, of course. But
and how detailed would your outline be?
The last one for the latest book was about 35 pages. So not like I know writers that write 70-page outlines, but I find that 30 pages or 35 pages is usually enough to give me what I need to know and where I'm going, and all the plotting is all kind of in there, and the mechanics of writing a mystery is all been set in place. So
okay, so that gives you the outline.
Yeah.
Do you also do things where you document how a character behaves or their background, those sorts of things? I've heard of that being done too.
I write a character's backstory, a complete backstory, and I usually write it for all of the major characters and any of the important minor characters. And it's just for me. It's for me to understand who this person is, what makes them tick, and why they do the things that they do in the book.
Okay, and you're saying that your goal is to write 2,000 words a day.
Yes.
Why 2,000?
Well, it's an arbitrary number. Actually, I asked around, and a very good friend of mine who's a professional writer, when I asked him, he said 2,000 words. That's what he writes. So that's the reason I chose it. And subsequently, I've talked to other writers, and they ask me the same question. I say 2,000. They say, wow, that's a lot. I only write about 600. And I said, well, I'm talking to the wrong writer. When I started, it would have been nice to do 600. But some days, with some books, I'm writing as much as 4,000 to 6,000 words a day. It really depends on the flow and how I'm feeling about the story. But yeah, generally, it's 2,000 a day.
Okay, so that means that you wouldn't stop at 2,000 if you were in the midst of something.
No, but I always like to start, and stop in the middle of a chapter. I usually don't like to end on a chapter. Yeah.
Why would that be?
It's just easier to get started in the morning again. It's just, you're already kind of into the action. I reread what I wrote the day before, or reread a little bit of it just to kind of get up to speed, and then I'm starting to, just jump right back into the action where I left off. So quite often I'll deliberately leave it in the middle of an action sequence or a suspense sequence.
Okay, that sounds interesting, because then maybe that helps you want to come back to it because there's something that's unfinished rather than, oh, now I've got to start something.
Yeah, it's like every day you don't want to start a new chapter because it's like starting the story from the beginning every day again. So it's nice to come into the middle of it and just start from there. So
Okay,
it may
interesting.
not work for everybody, but I found for me it really works well.
Okay, and typically how many hours does it take you to write 2,000 words?
It can be as little as an hour and a half or as long as, 8 hours. It really depends on how the words are flowing and, how the scene is coming together. And sometimes you have to stop and start, and you have to go back sometimes and tear what you've written apart and rewrite. And so it can be all over the map. But generally, I'm usually finished by lunch.
Okay, now I'm told that when someone is writing a book, the two most important things, apart from it being a good book, are having a really good cover and also having an excellent editor. Are both of those elements important?
Absolutely. My editor keeps me honest, keeps me. I tend to be lazy as a writer sometimes. I think, oh, that's good enough, and Amy, my editor, won't let me get away with that. She throws it back at me and says, "You're better than that. You can do better than that. You need to, this has got great stuff in it, and you need to really give it the attention it deserves." So I tend not to be as lazy anymore. I tend to try and get it right the first time. But
'Cause it does seem that the editor is very important, and when I talk to
Yes.
some people who think they're becoming writers, they seem to think that's an area they can scrimp on, and then basically they just have to have a proofreader.
No. I would not advise you unless you are really, well, I wouldn't advise it. No. Everybody that I know, professional or amateur, whatever their status as a writer, they all use editors, and for a good reason. You need that other set of eyes, with a different objective maybe than yours, just looking at the fiction, looking at it as a reader, going, this is great, this isn't so great, you need to do work here, this doesn't make any sense to me. I stopped when I was reading this particular paragraph. That's not a good thing. You need to do something there.
Right, and when I was reading your first book, I couldn't stop.
Yeah.
As I said, I don't read a lot of fiction, and so when I do, it's easy for me to stop. Okay, because it's not really the thing I really enjoy. But with yours, I couldn't put it down, and I pretty well read the whole thing in like a day or two, just hours and hours, and that was uncommon for me, but that's a testament to the book. I was just wondering, would you mind reading a portion of your book so that our viewers get a sense of what your style is like?
Sure, I can give you a little bit of my first book.
Okay, sure.
Dark Sunset. I'll just read about half of the first chapter. I don't think it really probably needs much in the way of a setup, but just that the character in the novel that I talked about, this is the character that I originally kind of based the whole premise of the book on.
Okay, and before you start, could you just show us the cover of the book?
Sure. You asked about covers before. I do have an excellent cover designer. And
okay, maybe just a little higher.
Oh, a little higher there. Sorry. Is that good? Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so if you'd please read something, that would be terrific.
Okay. He stopped paddling and let the lake gently pull him down. As the water closed over his head, Aubrey took a final breath. Apprehension and fear faded. Now, in the embrace of darkness, there would be peace. He felt a tug of regret as abstract became reality. As he sank deeper, he thought of the stars above him, of his cabin by the lake, of his parents. Death would not be a release. Death would only bring nothingness. The thought of that terrified him more than anything else ever had. I don't want to die. He began to thrash in the water, burning up precious oxygen as he fought his way toward the surface. A brilliant golden light guided him from what seemed like miles above. He clawed his way upward. It was an impossible distance. The last of his air was gone. His lungs felt like they were filled with burning razor blades. He had to breathe. I can't. I'll die. His head broke the surface and he drew in gloriously cool night air. He continued to breathe greedily. Panic gradually subsided as he floated. Orange and gold flared off the water. Strange. Aubrey twisted around to see what was causing it. 100 feet away, His cabin was on fire. Smoke began to drift across the lake, thickening as the fire grew in intensity. The dark tops of the pines undulated with its orange glow. There was a beast loose in the night. He swam desperately toward shore. The fire was already stabbing through holes that it had eaten in the roof. Superheated sap exploded inside the log walls, throwing brilliant streamers out into the darkness. Aubrey reached the shore and ran towards the conflagration. As he passed a patch of darkness, something stirred and moved forward. He didn't notice. The volunteer fire department would never be able to stop it. His cabin would continue to burn while they looked on helplessly. Aubrey's only legacy was gone. He should have felt something, but didn't. He sank to his knees before the fire, a supplicant, and laughed uncontrollably at this final absurdity. The porch roof collapsed forward, sending blazing cedar shingles cascading onto the lawn. Small fires started in the dry grass around him. Air flowed violently past. A vortex formed in the fire's center. A brilliant spiral of flame burst through the roof and reached into the sky. It was mocking him with its determined fury, clawing at the core of his being, hollowing him out. Aubrey was not alone. Someone had moved from the darkness of the woods and stood near him. Completely absorbed by the fire, he didn't sense that person's malevolence and unbridled hatred as it reached out toward him. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw something move. He started to turn. A sharp flare of pain in his right temple was the last thing Aubrey felt. He didn't hear the sickening crunch as the axe blade caved in the side of his skull and sent slivers of bone deep into his brain. Death was instantaneous. The killer looked down at the axe and then threw it into the heart of the fire. Aubrey's eyes were frozen open in death, their sheen gradually fading. The figure knelt beside his body. Off in the distance came the sound of sirens. In the flickering darkness, the killer dragged Aubrey into the woods, leaving a faint trail of blood in the grass. Aubrey Colgate Jones' cabin collapsed in on itself, throwing up a massive shower of sparks. Tiny points of light rose into the night sky and winked out one by one.
Thanks very much for reading that. When I read that, I just couldn't stop because I wanted to know more. I liked the way the writing was crisp and there was momentum and there's so many questions there.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
I really enjoy listening to an author read their own books.
Mm-hmm.
Have you considered doing audiobooks?
Yeah, we've talked about it. We do electronic books, we do print books, but yeah, right now I think it's finding the right voice for the book. I think it's finding the right person to do the reading.
Well, maybe the author is the right person.
Well,
worth considering.
I'm a reader, but I'm not sure I'd be the best person to do it. We did have a few people in mind, so yeah.
Okay, so after you wrote that book, Dark Sunset,
that's right.
What did you do? Did you start writing another book? Did you take a break? What happened?
No, I immediately, within about a month, started to write the sequel to it, which was Bloody Sunset. Had a slightly lighter tone than the first book. It wasn't as dark a book, and that was done deliberately. I kind of got the dark side out in the first book. What I really wanted to do in this book was, again, talk about another theme that I really felt strongly about, which was what had happened in the financial industry, especially in 2008, specifically Bernie Madoff's crimes and the bigger crimes of Wall Street. In the wake of the subprime lending scandal. So I really felt strongly about it. I worked in the financial services industry for 25 years, and most of the people I worked with were honest and focused on what I think were very noble goals. And to see this happening was really distressing. So I wanted to talk about it, but in a slightly more skewed way than just sort of getting up in a pulpit and preaching against it. So I created the book. Yeah.
Right, because you have touched on some serious topics in that series, and I think it's great that you tackled that topic, because we worked together for about 4 or 5 years in the financial sector, and so we have some insider insights, and it was really nice to see you taking the time to cover that topic.
Yeah, people really responded well to the book. It's actually Bloody Sunset just came out about 3 months ago, and we've already sold out the first printing of it. We've actually ordered a second printing, which is really nice.
Congratulations!
Well, thank you. Yeah, Molly Parsons seems to be building a fairly large fan club, and that's been very gratifying for me. I love to get emails and letters from the readers asking me specific questions, and some of the same questions you're asking me today. So it's really exciting. It validates what I've been doing. It gives me purpose in the morning when I get up to actually write my 2,000 words. So.
Okay, now when you're writing, are you writing for your audience or are you writing for yourself?
I'm always writing for myself. I'm my first reader. I usually live with a story for months before I start even putting it down in outline form. I'm usually formulating the story, working out the mechanics of how the murder mystery part of it's going to work, and it's inside me. So. It's definitely for me. If I'm happy enough, when I'm happy, then I'm ready to go and start writing it down. And hopefully, if people like what I've done, and so far, it seems to be working. So.
Okay, and after you wrote the first 2 Sunset books,
Yep.
What did you do next?
Well, I wanted to take a break from Sunset, so I wanted to do something different. I wanted to test myself, push myself, see if I could do something that I was outside of my comfort zone. So I wanted to write a book that was funny, which I had toyed with for a long time. And I also wanted to write something in first person. And I thought the challenge for me was, if I create the 2 most despicable characters on the face of the planet and make them the central characters in this book, how will people respond to them? So
Okay.
I created Rip and Wilma, not their real names, who are a pair of contract killers who work in Detroit. And they basically get into a situation that's kind of like Moby Dick. Basically, it's my skewed version of Moby Dick.
And I've had the opportunity to read the
Yes.
Rip and Wilma books, and
play a little bit of a bigger role in it yourself. So yeah.
yes, I'm actually a character in both of those books, but it's fiction, so the things that are depicted there are not me in real life.
I don't know. The idea of naming characters after people I know just sort of came to me when I was writing Hairtrigger. I tend to avoid it in the Sunset books, but I thought, well, this is going to be a one-off book. I should really thank some people that I know and maybe give them a little bit of a thrill. So I asked permission from a couple of people, you included, to actually create characters based mostly on their names, but believe me, you're not the person that you named in the book.
Well, I just think of the body count in that book.
Yes, fairly high.
So as I was reading, I was thinking, will this character make it to the next chapter or the next chapter? And
I was wondering that
when I was building tension in me.
I actually in the outline draft, you die.
Oh no!
Yeah. In the original outline, the character was going to die, but I really felt like maybe I need this character for future books. So,
and that leads to another question I wanted to ask you. This is something that I think Stephen King said, that when he's writing, the characters take on take on lives of their own, and they start doing things almost on their own. Do you find that really happens?
Yeah, it's not a particularly magical thing, but it does happen.
What do you mean it's not magical?
Well, the character really doesn't come to life in the Stephen King sense, and stalk the writer and force him to write what they want him to write. But it is a you do write a character and you have an idea of what that character is going to be like, and sometimes as you're working on the story, you make little changes or bigger changes in what the character does and how the character acts in the situation. And there's a logic that builds from that. You find that suddenly the character is off doing things that you didn't expect them to do, but it's all still controlled. You're still in control of it, but the character really does kind of assume a life. And to me, that's always a good sign. It certainly happened with Rip. I was expecting Rip's character to go in a different direction, and he really went in a different direction from what I was expecting. So.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Now, do you think as the writer that you can force a character to do something that's out of character?
No. I think the readers will pick up on that. They're usually pretty good. Well, certainly my editor would, reminding me that, this is not the way this character would do something. And I've heard that from her, where, Rip would never do this, or Wilma wouldn't do this, or Molly would never do this. So,
Right, because you get to know them almost as if they're real people, though some of them you wouldn't want to meet in real life.
I hope not. Yeah.
You get a sense of, yes, this is possible or this is not possible.
Yeah. And it's part of the believability of a character. If people find that the character has credibility, they'll believe, and they'll believe what the person is experiencing is real as well. So,
Now, what's next in your writing journey?
I've got 2 Sunset books finished, and like I said, they're in various stages of editing right now. One I actually just finished, so I'm busy revising it, and we're editing the sequel to Hairtrigger, which was never meant to have a sequel, but now has a sequel called Double Tap, and it's coming out hopefully later this year. And then the 3rd Sunset book, Foggy Sunset, will be coming out sometime next year. And the 4th Sunset book, which is Stolen Sunset, will also be coming up, I think probably late next year, around this time next year. So.
Well, it's amazing to see how you started from one book and now you've written so many and you've published several and you've received some really good feedback from readers.
Yeah, I'm gratified with the readers' reaction. I'm gratified with the critics' reactions to the books have all been really positive. So it's, it was something I wanted to do. It was something I do even if people didn't read the books. So it's really gratifying to actually have people ask me serious questions about some of the characters, and in some cases disturbing questions about some of the characters. But
okay, can you give us an example of a disturbing question?
I think the one I get the most from people is they love the Rip and Wilma characters, and they really like the indiscriminate way that they kill people. And I basically created a pair of hitmen who could perform their tasks for the middle class. So
right.
If you could afford
cost effective.
Yeah, exactly. If you could afford a decent car, you could afford their services. So I think everybody kind of related to that and said, "Oh, I had this landlord, or I had this person in a store I just love to sick Wilma on." Especially Wilma. Wilma seems to be a fan favorite, so it does bother me, but
Okay, at least you've created characters that people really enjoy.
Yeah, they invest in them, which is really nice for me. I think when people actually invest in and really feel like they have a sort of an ownership of that character, it's really gratifying for any writer. So.
And what's the best way for people to reach you?
Through my website, www.petermcgarvey.com.
Okay, well, thanks for dropping by.
Well, thanks very much for having me.
Thanks for joining us for Tea at Taxevity. The Taxevity Insurance Advisory helps you understand insurance and bridges gaps in your coverage. There's no premium for peace of mind. How healthy is your insurance?